Hi, I'm Celia Quatermain and this is the first chapter of my novel Impotence. The outline of a man, tucked into the shadow of the chimney breast, chuckles. It were a good night last night, wasn't it? His voice rasps, metal on metal. He lifts a hand to his mouth, and in the silence of the room you can hear his breath drawing in fire. A red dot in his hand burns bright for a long moment, and an orange glow warms the sharp angles of his face. Yeah, it was, a softer voice concurs succinctly from the opposite side of the room. Over there, against the wall, another man, perhaps as old as 30, sits in the moonlight. His back is resting against the pasty, anaglyptic ridges of wallpaper. His face is tipped ceilingwards, reliving the fond memory. One of his dark denim legs is bent upwards towards his chest, and the other thrust out into the room, where a foot in a mud-spattered, cracked-soled trainer lolls across the violent, colour-leached swirls of a threadbare carpet. Out in the open, sitting somewhere between the two, a boy turns his head in the direction of the first voice and wipes his nose with the back of his hand. His nose is dry. It usually is, but he often has to check. He watches hungrily as the dot of red light rises again, swells bright in that darkest corner of the room, then moves across to the right and down as it fades to a smoulder. It's almost completely black over there by the chimney breast, sheltered as it is from the moonlight. But if the boy concentrates really hard, he can just about make out the slight silhouette of an arm behind the dot, and a delicate waft of grey smoke swimming in the inky pixels of his squint-closed eyes. Have you ever been to a club, Mikey? The voice from the dark corner is rumbling rough and curling in an accent that the boy hadn't heard before today. The man on the other side of him humps a snigger and coughs it out. The boy lifts the can he is holding to his mouth. No, not yet, he mumbles, and pours in liquid to drown the embarrassment of his reply. The fizz is cold, metallic in his mouth, bitter on his tongue, and new bread on his inward breath. He doesn't really like the taste, but he keeps it there for a moment, savouring and tense, listening to the tickle of bubbles at the back of his nose. Outside, a car sweeps down the road towards them. Its headlights through the windows scan the space like a beacon from a watchtower. It lays bare the three of them sitting on the floor of the abandoned room, 2 grown men dressed darkly so as to fade into the night, and the boy, clothed randomly in navy tracky bottoms, an old red hoodie, and a blue baseball cap pushed down over his wispy, weaselly face. But the beam isn't searching for them, and as it swings past, it sends their enormous shadows flying in an arc across the walls and exposes the detail of the little there is to be seen. The whisper of the net at the window, a scatter of twisted beer cans left where they have fallen, and dog ends, crumpled like dozens of dead soldiers around an empty fire grate. Otherwise nothing, except, close to the door, a sliding stack of old newspapers, left over from the packing. Don't worry, there's plenty of time for clubs. You stick with us. We're your family now. We'll show you a thing or two. The smoking man turns his hollow cheeks and hooked nose towards the boy. This is a good place you've got here, by the way. He leans forward and holds out the smoke towards the child. The man's eyes are small and blue and cold. The boy reaches out a hand, the one without the port wine stain. He keeps that one hidden for now, and takes the joint in his long thin fingers with their chewed and dirty nails. He looks at the spliff for a moment, with its white smoothness, and he holds it like a reward, his chest swelling with pride. How'd you find it? The man keeps his voice low. My mum used to work here. She looked after the old man before he died, got him his lunch and stuff. Carefully the boy puts the fat rollie between his lips and pulls the curious prize into his mouth. The peak of his cap diverts rising smoke towards his eyes, making them water. His head spins slightly as the drug smarts its way down into his chest. The skin inside his throat tingles and he wants to cough, but he holds his breath, screws up his eyes and manages to stop himself. Does your mum look after a lot of old folk then? When the boy opens his eyes again, The two men are looking at each other across him as if they understand each other, as if they don't need words to communicate. Mikey's gut twists a little with envy. He would like some of that closeness in his life too. Do you know any other gaffs like this, ones that haven't been cleaned out yet? It's the moonlit man speaking this time. He is gentler looking than the smoker, but more closed in. His face is rounder, disc-like, framed with a curtain of light brown hair that falls in a lank fringe across his forehead, shadowing his eyes. Nah, Mike sputters, in a hurry to get things straight between them. My mum doesn't do that anymore. She's a dinner lady now. I know loads of places like this round here, though, but they're not empty. They've got people in them still. Well, the smoking man's voice is reassuring. That might not be such a problem, young Michael. His hand comes out of the shadow, and he flicks a fleck of invisible dust from his knee with a yellowed finger. We just want to have a look round, you see. We're not going to do any harm to anyone. You could come with us. Show us a few. I suppose I could. The boy hesitates. He doesn't seem very sure. Look at it like this, the harsh voice encourages. You keep us entertained for a few days while we're in the area, and we could call that last little transaction a gift. What do you think, Carl? Then anything you make when you sell the rest of the gear on to others, you could keep as yours. Sounds like a good idea to me. Carl is buoyant. Possibly a very lucrative arrangement we could build between the three of us. It's lucky we bumped into each other, I'd say. And don't worry, we're not going to hurt anyone. We don't want any trouble. We'll just get in, have a look round, see what we can find, and no one will ever know we've been. Carl tilts his head, looks sideways at the boy's doubtful expression. He takes in the child's weedy frame and his young face. There is barely yet a blemish on his soft pale skin, or at least not one that wouldn't wash off. No grimy detail to complement the shock of wayward dark brown hair as it straggles out of the back of his baseball cap, splitting into rat's tails and curling away as soon as it meets the resistance of a shoulder. I'm not so sure though, Matt. Carl seems to waver. True, with that slim, fit body he could be very useful to us, but I'm not so sure the boy's man enough for this sort of thing yet. You've got to be a certain type of person to do what we do. It's not everyone's cup of tea, this line of work. What do you mean? Mikey jumps in, indignant. Of course I am. He's already on his feet, fingernails pressed hard into his palms and heading for the door. Come on then, I'll show you. It would be fair to say that Mikey hadn't expected his descent into the criminal underworld to happen as quickly as it did. But Matt and Carl weren't like his usual mates. They were people that he'd only met the day before, and chance meetings can do that to you. Also, at the time he was probably a little bit high because, later, looking back, he couldn't remember climbing up the ladder that they propped against the upstairs window of the next house they chose to visit. He could remember climbing in the window, though, and he knew from the marks he found on his leg next day that the windowsill had rasped along the inside of his thigh. But at the time, he was sure he didn't really feel it, or rather he had felt it, but the leg hadn't felt like it was his, as he edged his foot downwards, pointing and prodding, searching towards the floor. He had decided that the house was badly designed, that the floor was too far away from the window, but then he was a first-timer. As he balanced at the top of the ladder, waiting for instruction, Mikey had examined the hands that held tight onto the window frame, trying not to pull. He knew they were his. Both of them were long and fine and familiar, and this one, the one on his right side, had a port wine stain at the base of the thumb. It was something that had caused him trouble in the past. He usually tried to keep it hidden. If he hadn't felt the need to keep it hidden, he might have done better at school, because Mikey was not a stupid boy, just one that didn't want not to be wanted. Usually he knew that he could trust his hands, and in the window that night his grip was steady and sure, but he wasn't certain how strong it was, or even how strong he wanted it to be. He didn't want anything to give, anything to come away in his hand. But he did know that his palm was sweating, and that the winter air was tingling in his nostrils, lining them with ice so that he thought he might sneeze. When he looked back later, he could remember hoping not. He had a feeling that Matt and Carl wouldn't like it if he did. At the time, as he edged himself a little further through the window and into the room, his other hand was beside him, holding on to the top of the ladder. He wasn't sure whether he was using it to keep the ladder steady or using the ladder to steady him. It was one or the other, perhaps even a bit of both, but either way it wasn't working, because every now and then the ladder wobbled as if someone below was trying to shake him off. For a moment he thought he was going to fall. Panic made him pant. As he looked over his shoulder and down onto the ground to check, his breath came in short white bursts out into the cold white air. Below, in the distant dark, the smirking circle of Carl's white face floated up like a dead fish on a herbaceous sea. "Hurry up!" Carl's voice hissed up the rungs. "I'm freezing my bollocks off down here." At that moment in time, Mikey swallowed the tasteless nothing in the salt dry of his mouth and wished that he was somewhere else. Anywhere else. Behind him, out of the window, he could see the pitch and roll of the rooftops all around, a necklace of haloed streetlights warming a path between empty black spaces, while the fingers of winter trees stretched up from the shadow gardens to try and touch the lights of the star-sparkling sky. What a beautiful end to the year. Mikey turned back towards the house and took a deep breath. The breath wobbled its way down into his lungs. Better get this over with. He grabbed the air firmly in his chest and held it there as he forced his leg down as far as he could, so far that he felt that his ribs were ripping apart. At last, when he had extended himself almost to his limit, he felt the brush of carpet firmer than air beneath his foot and relaxed slightly, letting a little of his breath creep out from between his teeth. He shifted his body weight forward, away from the rungs of the wobbly ladder and further onto the room. But as soon as he did, there was a dull rush and a thud. A pile of boxes that he had mistaken for the floor slid away from his foot and avalanched their contents onto the ground. Mikey grabbed the window frame with both of his sweat-slimy, tingling hands and froze. Suspended there across the sill, one leg on either side, he teetered like an acrobat, rocking like a child's balancing toy, while his eyes flicked across the room to where Matt's back was poised, silent, hawkish by the bedroom door, where he stood trying to peer round it and out into the dead black landing. With the noise of the sliding boxes, Matt's head spun round. His small blue eyes stabbed at the boy through the blackness, and his hand flew up in a stiff order of silence as he turned his head back and listened for the house's response. Mikey stayed as still as he could, waiting for instruction. The wood of the window dug into his groin, while the panting breath released from his lungs became a white mist and floated off, sending smoke signals out into the winter night. Time stretched in the silence. Slowly Matt raised his hand and beckoned the boy to come to him. Quickly. To come quickly. To join him. The instruction was a relief, and relief made the boy agile. He slipped over the sill and slubbed onto the bedroom floor like a cat landing on all fours. He paused. He stood. Moonlight from the open window splashed a stain down the front of his hoodie. He looked around. They were in a small bedroom. The walls were papered in a faded floral print that ran in lines from the yellowing skirting board at the bottom to the yellowing picture rail at the top. Above the picture rail the ceiling took over, grey and smutty. The only other decoration in the whole room was a washed-out print of a haloed, bearded man dressed in a blue robe, holding a bird on his hand and surrounded by wild animals. Other than that, the walls were bare. Along one wall, a single bed was made up for someone and covered with a pale coverlet. It looked like nylon, like it might melt in the heat of the sun and stick to your flesh like toffee. But someone must have chosen to buy it. The shiny fabric was top-stitched with a quilted diamond pattern, while the ruched sides wrapped the bed in waves of satin sheen. Next to it, on the wooden bedside table, sat a small lamp in the shape of a red and white spotted toadstool with a garden gnome leaning up against it. Once it might have been bright and exciting for a child, but here the half-light had stolen some of its identity, left it standing still, drained of colour, dated and expressionless. The rest of the room looked like it had been picked up, shaken and dumped in a corner. The box that had been under the window was ripped open down the side now, spewing books and papers across the checkered print of the carpet. The drawers on the dressing table beside the door had been pulled out, and their contents left spilling down the front like the chemical froth of an overflowing drain. And on the dressing table, in front of a large utilitarian mirror, a small collection of china animals had fallen on their sides as if felled in a massacre, and several embroidered lace-edged doilies lay askew, lily pads on an overcrowded pond. As he looked at the chaos, Mikey caught sight of a white-faced, frightened child looking back at him from the mirror. For a moment he thought it was a ghost. He jumped, took a step back, and then realising it was his own reflection, he pulled himself up to make himself look taller, stronger. He yanked off his baseball cap, quickly ran his fingers through his hair, and pulled his fringe forward to disguise his own baby face, to make himself look tougher, badder. The seconds ticked away. Outside, the squall and yowl of cats fighting, overlaid with a rush of distant train, was suddenly fractured by a series of massive explosions. For a moment the room was illuminated in shades of red, gold and green. Mikey stiffened, kept his eyes fixed on the back of the man by the door, waiting for guidance. When he turned to speak, Matt didn't use sound. "Fireworks," he mouthed, raising his eyes to the heavens and gesturing with his thumb that this was a good thing. "I've already checked in here," Matt continued, shaking his head and pointing at his eyes with 2 fingers of one hand while circling the room with the other. "There's nothing." "Are we going in?" Mikey barely breathed the words. "Shh!" Matt's head flipped back towards the door, as if to suggest that someone might be listening on the other side. He waited another moment, and then moved silently across until he was standing right up against the boy. He took hold of Mikey's arm. His fingers were sharp and pinching. Mikey could feel Matt's chest through the fabric of his coat as it swelled up and shrank back with every breath he took. Matt bent his head close to the boy and put his mouth right up against Mikey's ear so that when he spoke right into the boy's head. The mood in the room had changed. "You've got to prove yourself now, boy. It's payday." Matt's voice was barbed, his breath a sour mix of sugar and stale tobacco. Mikey almost gagged. He wanted to pull away, but he didn't dare. "I'm going to leave this room in a minute and head for the stairs. I'll go down, see what I can find. I want you to stay up here, check out the other rooms. I'll go first, and you wait a minute until after I've gone to see if there's any movement. If not, get on with the job as quick as you can." Matt's body was tall and lean. Up close, Mikey could see his teeth. They looked soft, spongy, coated in something stained, exactly the colour of the gold chain that his mother kept in the box under her pillow and thought that he didn't know was there. "And you know what we said before?" Matt hissed. "Well, there's more to it now. You've got to look for stuff we might use. Be methodical. Check out all drawers and cupboards. Look for anything you think we can shift." Mikey went tense and tried to pull away. Matt yanked him back and fixed him with his tight blue eyes. "Oh, come on. You want to do business or not? You're not a baby. We said we'd write off your debt, and food costs money, and there's no free lunches at this cafe." He curved his lips into a smirk, releasing his grip tightly. "And you can't back out now. You're here. No one would believe you weren't involved. Might as well get on with it. Listen out for Carl in case he whistles. I don't know where the old bat is, but I expect she's tucked up in the front bedroom dreaming of what her old man used to give her for Christmas. So leave that room till last. We don't want her to wake before we've got what we've come for now, do we?" Mikey nodded. He breathed in dust, swallowed in his sandpaper mouth and whispered, "Do you think we should leave this one if she's here? Try somewhere where they're away for the holiday?" "You scared?" Matt's words slipped out from between his lips like tripwires. "I knew you wouldn't be able to pull this off. Go if you like. You can wait at the bottom, send Carl up. If you do that, you'll still owe us." No, I'll do it. I just thought..." "Well, don't. It's thinking that gets kids like you into trouble. Just do as you've been told and you'll be okay. Now hold the door while I go out so it don't make a noise. Have you got the torch? Well, don't switch it on unless you have to. Use the light from the street lights, but keep away from the window and close to the edge of the room. That way the floorboards creak less when you move." The boy nodded. knocking his head against Matt's chest as he did so. "I'm off them." Matt used his hand that he had around the boy's arm to guide him towards the door. When they got there he gave an encouraging nod that was almost friendly and slid out into the silent arteries of the house. For a long minute Mikey stood in the room listening. Matt had made no sound as he moved. He was a pro. All that Mikey could hear was his own body shaking. All he could smell was dust and lavender, laced with a cordite drifting in on the night air from the New Year's fireworks in the park. All he could see was old and faded. His mouth was leather. Worms writhed in his stomach like a box of bait. Cold hands wrapped around him, stroking his arms and tickling along the back of his neck. What am I doing here? Some Happy New Year this. He felt a lump rising in his throat. He hadn't meant it this evening to end up like this. They'd let him have it for free. It was his own fault. He shouldn't have called them back for more. Mikey looked back towards the window. Outside, the tops of trees in the garden behind him waved back at him. They beckoned him to leave what he was doing and come. Perhaps he should just get out while he could. Climb back down the ladder. Tell Carl that Matt had told him to get off home. He could be back in bed in 20 minutes. But in his heart he knew that they wouldn't leave it at that. There's always a price. And his only other option was his mum's gold chain. It would be easy to get, but he couldn't make himself do that to her. Which would be worse? She would probably cry if she knew what he was up to right now. He turned back into the room, pushed his hands into the pockets of his tracky bottoms. The fabric felt warm and soft and familiar. Better get this over with. He pulled back the door and stared for a moment around the frame and out along the black velvet landing. Then he took his first step forward. He forced his brain to adapt itself to the dark. The lenses of his eyes broke into a matrix of pixelation. Each cell contained a fleck of dust swimming in his tears, waving its arms like the tentacles of a tiny squid. He swallowed and ran his hand along the wall, catching the frame of another door. His fingers felt up the slick painted wood until they stubbed against the rim of the handle, walking his fingers along the device until he could take it firmly in his palm and twist. Click. The latch jumped back behind the faceplate, and the boy eased the door open. Black into black, he could see absolutely nothing. He went a step forward, but something hard hit him in the chest. "Oh, fuck!" The words slipped out. He froze. He listened. Nothing. He reached inside his pocket and brought out the torch. Shielding the end with his spare hand, he flicked the switch. A moment was all he needed. His hand shone red with the light behind it. Right in front of him were the shelves of a linen cupboard, stacked neatly with faded piles of old cloth. Down behind the shelves, through the slats, he could just make out the dome of an old copper tank, hunched like someone in a game of hide-and-seek. A good place for stashing valuables, perhaps. He tucked the torch in at the corner and slid his hands between the folds of fabric. He pushed first one way and then the next. Nothing. He reached at the back of the shelf. The warmth from the copper seeped up through the wood-smelling slats, wrapping itself around the linen. Then Mikey's finger hit something hard and shiny. His heart lurched, and his hand slid over a pile of unexpected, tubular shapes, stacked like logs in the back corner. He took hold of one and pulled it towards him. Whatever it was ridged and covered in a sharp, smooth material that crackled under his touch. He dangled it in front of the torch and pressed the button on. White letters danced along the blue-wrapped tube. "Happy Shopper Rich Tea Biscuits." Biscuits, he whispered out loud, and reached his fingers back again to count. There must have been 20 packets stashed in there. He put this one in his pocket for later, but left the rest where they were and reached instead for the shelf above his head. One by one he separated the fabric items stashed there and pulled them off, letting them slip soundlessly to the floor, unravelling as they went. As he worked, the beam of light from the torch made shadows dance on the wall behind him. It stretched his limbs, turned him into a monster. The falling fabric stirred up air that smelled of coal tar soap and cotton fibre. It tickled the back of his throat so that he wanted to cough, but he mustn't. When the top shelf was empty, the pile of unfolded linen slouched on the floor like a white cloud in a black sky. The boy's confidence was growing. This wasn't so hard as he'd thought. He stepped over the cloud and took 2 paces towards the next door on the landing. Probably the front bedroom. He could hear Matt moving around downstairs. He thought he should tell him later, so he'd be quieter next time. Next time. He must be getting used to the idea. His hand hovered over the next doorknob. He took a breath in and held it in his chest, grasped the knob and turned. Silently the door slid open. She may be in here, he thought. He'll just take a peep. The room was quite light. The orange glow from the streetlight filtered through the nets onto another room in chaos. There was no one in the bed. Perhaps she slept downstairs. His mum told him they often did when they got old. The room looked as if someone had been there before them. The contents from the chest of drawers under the window were spilling everywhere. Clothes tumbled over each other as if trying to escape, and the floor was strewn with bedding, half pulled off the bed, left lying where it fell. Brrr! He couldn't stop himself from retching. That's rank. The room stank of cat piss. The stench was so strong that he had to turn his face away and pull his jumper up over his nose and mouth like a mask before he could breathe again. As he scanned the room, he caught a glimpse of a photo in the photo frame beside the bed. 2 people, a bit younger than his mother was now, stood in black and white, side by side, holding hands. The man was dressed in a suit and wearing a dark hat, while the woman's head was tilted slightly on one side, and the smile on her face was so joyful that you almost didn't need to notice the old-fashioned style of her floral print dress. Beside the picture, in a glass of water, a set of false teeth hovered like a crab in a rock pool. Mikey reached down to pull open a drawer of the bedside cabinet. It was rammed so full of something that the drawer stuck. He held the jumper in its place across his nose with his teeth and jiggled the drawer, shaking the contents slightly until they shifted enough and gave way with a jolt. Inside there were hundreds of pencils, all brand new, unsharpened pencils, some with rubbers on the end, some without, some with painted red and some with blue with gold lettering along the side. Mikey grabbed a big handful and threw them onto the unmade bed before feeling around at the back of the drawer in case anything else valuable was in there. But no. He made his way over to the dressing table. The smell was making him giddy. Light splashed through the window and onto the bottles and jars and the old lady's hairbrush. He pulled open a little drawer under the mirror and peered inside. There was a noise behind him. He turned, almost falling over with fright. Matt was at the door. Oh, jeez, what's that smell? Dirty cow, she's been pissing her bed, Matt hissed, beckoning with his head. Come on, we've got to go. What is it? Is someone coming? No, it's worse than that, much worse. Leave that, we've got to get out of here. We've got to get out of here now.